Um, Pat, I have a message from Mark Hoffman that he's trying to get into the live feed. Is that available to him?
Yes, I've had a little bit of a problem here. I just had to rearrange some things to get this live. I had to put a new link on the school website for board docs under virtual meeting. So if you could
Okay,
please let everyone know to go to the school website under Board of Education, virtual board meeting, and the new link is posted.
okay, I'll reply to his text. Okay, Megan Drake said she's driving, but it won't let her in. Could somebody please text her that
I will let her
information?
in right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we've got her.
Oh, great. Hi, Megan. So, Mr. French, if you could let the attendants know that Megan just joined us.
I will do that. For the record, what time do we open the meeting? At 6:30, was it exact?
6:31.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 2.01, are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none. Item 3.01. Good evening. For those who are online with us or those who may watch later, I just wanted to take this opportunity to bring everyone up to speed on the significant changes that have taken place within our district. On Monday, June 29th, Mr. Rod Wakeham announced his resignation. The board approved a separation agreement with Mr. Wakeham and appointed Mr. Doug Menser to be the interim superintendent. The purpose of our workshop this evening is the first step in the superintendent selection process. This is one of the most important jobs that we as a board will have. I want to make this a fair and open process that will include feedback and buy-in from staff and the community. We have a fractured board and a community that has lost faith in us. This is our chance to come together and work hard for the future success of our district. The face of public education is changing more quickly than any of us could have expected, and pulling out the interview questions from 10 years ago just doesn't make sense. Public education has become more of a business, with districts competing with each other for students and staff. I especially noticed it this year as I saw many "Congratulations, Class of 2020" signs on lawns in our community from other school districts. The starting point is for us to prioritize the leadership qualities we wish to see in our next superintendent and conduct our search around those skills. We want to develop an objective tool to evaluate candidates based on the qualities needed to take Trenton Public Schools into the future. I have been in touch with community members, students, our legal counsel, superintendents from other districts, and consultants from both Wayne Risa and the Michigan Association of School Boards, seeking their input and advice on the process. This has led me to Dr. Rod Green from MASB, who I asked to speak to us about best practices and tools available to guide us in this important task. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Rod.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. And so I've got I think if I'm able to present, I've got a little PowerPoint I wanted to put in here. So let me see if I've got that up. Yeah. So I think I can go to the slideshow. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to just kind of go through some of the just basic points, and then I'm going to try to get into some of the things that you're really asking and dealing with right now. So some of this is a little bit like just background and gives you a little bit of knowledge. And just to give you a little bit of my background, I am a consultant with Michigan School Boards, and I've been doing that for a few years now. And I've done about 30 searches for superintendents, and nearby to you would be Huron. I did Huron, and then I did Van Buren a few years ago. But I was a superintendent for 24 years, and East China was my main district. So anyway, that's kind of my background. And let me just get into this a little bit, and then feel free to to jump in and ask questions as you go. So first of all, MASB does a lot of searches and has a very extensive network. One of the things about Michigan is that we don't attract a lot of out-of-state applicants. And so there's a couple of reasons for it. Part of it is our pay level and the various factors that go into dual income houses and things like that. And we do have a lot of openings. So I don't know if you're aware that we'll probably have about 80 openings this year. And so there's already been several that have been filled, and there's still several that are open right now. So the one thing about Michigan is we have a stricter Open Meetings Act, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit to make sure that you understand that a lot of this process, almost all of this process, will be in open session. So here's how the vacancies are filled, in case you were wondering. And we did this research over the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years. And so you'll see a pretty good mix. Some are superintendents previously, some are principals aspiring to become a superintendent, or maybe an assistant superintendent. And so you'll see the whole mix in that regard. Now, here's one thing that you might want to be aware of, is that you have to hire somebody that has a valid administrator certificate. And so then also they have to keep it valid. And so I'm sure you're aware of that, and that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're going through the process. If you are going to hire somebody that's non-certificated, you can do that, but you have to go through some process to do that, and you'll want to contact someone if that is the case. And so here's a couple of things just to know that you have to go into the system and apply for a permit, and then you have to have some rationale and things like that. So just to keep that in mind. And then of course they have to get the certificate as they go. Okay, so the Open Meetings Act. So you guys are aware that all of your meetings are open to the public, and all decisions have to be made in a meeting open to the public. And that includes all deliberations toward a decision. So sometimes what happens in this process is somebody will say, hey, let's just take them out to dinner, or let's just, talk about it and get to know the candidate, through phone calls or something like that. All of that would be improper in regard to your duty under the Open Meetings Act. So you can't email candidates and you can't talk to candidates. You have to do it in open. And so that's one thing as you're doing your search, you want to make sure you keep in mind. So in regard to a search process, you've already outlined some of the things that you're going to do. And so this is I've kind of shortened this down a little bit in terms of what you need to be thinking about. But the first thing that you're going to do, and this might be what you're doing tonight, and you might have done some of this, maybe last week, but you start thinking about the process. Like, what are the dates going to be, and what's the calendar look like? Can we get the posting out? Should we do a salary comparison? What are the various things that we're looking for? So that's kind of in the first opening stages, and I think you've probably done some of that. And then when you're thinking about salary, you really should think about salary before you start interviewing. And so this is one thing that, you might want to avail yourself of some comparison data. I'm sure Wayne Risa could help you out with that, or you could look around, some of the different districts in your area. You can look at what Rod was making and use that as a comparison, like, okay, did we think that was too high or was that too low? And you need to really think about being competitive. You're going to want to be similar to where the other districts are in your neck of the woods. Now, this is something you mentioned, Kelly, in your opener, in terms of engaging the stakeholders, and I think that's a very good idea. And I'm going to share with you tonight, I can share a survey with you, and it can be very simple. but you want to try to think about what are the qualities that people might want to see in the next superintendent. And so you might want to do like a survey monkey or some type of a communication to your community and to your staff and allow people to weigh in on the types of qualities that they like to see. You could also do some feedback forms in your first interview. So if you make up a short little form, you can have people weigh in on the candidates, and then they can turn that into you after the interview, and you can read those comments and that feedback as you're deliberating and getting ready to go into a second round or making an offer. You could even have candidates, community members or staff members suggest interview questions for the second round. Usually I would say the second round on that. And you can also have feedback forms in a second round. So there's ways to engage people in this process for sure. And I would say for sure you're going to want to do a survey and get that out right away would be one thing. And then secondly, have feedback forms for your interview process. That would be two ways to do some of what you were talking about earlier.
Rod, I just wanted to stop you. I have a question on that. Would you, I guess what I was thinking is of almost having three surveys, having one survey that would be to just the broad community, and maybe you're getting into that here. Another one that would be for staff, and then possibly a third that would be for our own board so that we could kind of determine and rank what we thought the necessary skills were and the most important skills. Obviously we're not going to find a candidate that's perfect in every area. So I think it's important to focus in on what, we think is needed now and what we think is going to be needed in the future in terms of skill levels.
Yeah, you could do that, Kelly. But I think what you'll find is that people, it really works well to get that feedback from everybody, and you'll see that it's very similar to what you think. And so I haven't seen a lot of differences, but certainly if the feedback came back, like for example, the community wants somebody that's, an out of the box thinker, a big risk taker, and that was their top priority. And that certainly wasn't the board's. You can reflect on that and know that, but yeah, you could do three different ones, but one way to do that is to do the same survey and just have people indicate who they are, what kind of a stakeholder they are, so you can differentiate it like that as well. But you're going to see, like if you came up with qualities, so there's probably, 25 qualities you could have that you could list, all the way from, things like responsive, organized, good listener, communicator. There's all kinds of different things that you could list. And then what I would suggest is have people rank them 1 to 5, like 5 is high, and then 4 is, pretty high, and 3 is like, yeah, that's pretty good. So a lot of the qualities, everyone thinks they're all important, but you're going to see a differentiation when people have to do a 5, 4, or 3 or something. You'll see, like honesty, for example, always comes out number 1. Honesty is number 1. Number 2 is integrity, because almost everybody puts that as a 5. And then you'll see things like if you put down like risk taker or already knows the district, sometimes you'll get lower marks on those. People will say, yeah, we don't really need a risk taker. That's not really our top priority. Or I've seen them before where there's like sensitive to other people's needs, or something like that. You'll see lots of different things you could put in there. So you'll see this spread of what are the most important things. And I think what I usually see come out is things like honest, forthright, collaborative, hardworking, good listener. Those are usually the ones that kind of boil to the top. And then the ones that are not quite as important are things like maybe risk taker or maybe something else. I don't know what, but anyway, they're all important. That's the thing about it, is that they're all important. And so I would suggest two areas. One would be qualities. So that's what I would call qualities. And then another one would be competencies. So more like, background in finance, background in curriculum, background in personnel, those types of competencies, as opposed to attributes or personal qualities. And it's nice when people can kind of weigh in. So you'll see, like, for example, most people will say we want somebody that's been in education, has been in K-12 education, as opposed to like a hospital administrator or a military person coming in. They want somebody that's kind of been in the trenches, knows the game, so to speak. So you'll see that be a lot higher in terms of previous positions maybe that they've been in. So previous positions would be another one that you could put in there, like superintendent or assistant superintendent or principal or teacher, and you let people mark those, and you'll see that that's what they'll mark as teacher, principal, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
I mean, you can do 3 surveys if you wanted to, but I don't think, I mean, obviously it's a board, this is a board decision. So what you're really asking for from the community, and the reason I don't think I would differentiate it, is that you're wanting to know what they think. You want to know what the staff and community think. And so you want that input, and you want that in your thinking. And so you don't want to separate yourselves. I don't feel, this is my feeling, you don't need to separate yourselves. You are already separate. You are the board. You're the ones that are going to make the decision. It's you 7 that make this decision, and you're making it based on your own thoughts and feelings, and of course you're listening to the community and listening to staff of what they like, but what I found is that it's usually a lot of the same. People want those qualities. They want somebody that's collaborative. They want somebody that's a good listener. They want somebody that's honest, and so do you, and so I don't see a big difference there. Does that help at all?
Yes, thank you.
All right, let me keep going. So, if I didn't mess this up here, let's see. Okay, here we go. So that's the idea of getting the feedback, and so I do think that's an important point. And I even put this slide in. It's nice to have that perspective, and that gives you confidence, and it gives them confidence, and it's kind of like you're in this together of trying to hire the right person for this job, and so I think that's kind of a nice thing to have that in your back pocket. So then what you're going to need to do after you've gotten some input, so you're going to be on that like right away. Then your next workshop, you would be presenting that input, some type of a summary, some type of analysis. And then from there, you're kind of talking about this final selection criteria. And so I don't know if you've seen those before. I can show you one, what it looks like. But basically, you're trying to kind of capture the stuff from the input and put it into this is what we're looking for. And then that's what helps you think about your questions. You're trying to get questions that kind of get at that criteria, and so that's a thought for you. So in this workshop here, you're really looking at, let's look at the stakeholder input. Let's talk about our top priorities of what we're looking for. Okay, let's make sure we've got the questions ready. Let's talk about the interview protocol. So what do I mean by that? I mean things like, so each board member would ask a question. So you kind of go in a round robin format for your questions. So the board president usually would open up, and then the first question might be by the board member sitting next to the board president, or maybe you've got a little bit of an order that you go by, and and then each person gets to ask one. So what happens with that is the superintendent candidate then focuses on the person asking the question, and so you spread that around a little bit, and you get that eye contact and those good kind of interview feelings with the candidate. You want the candidate to feel comfortable and to be comfortable with the process. So you need to talk about how you're going to do it and just make sure everybody's kind of on board so it's not awkward when you get going. And then in this meeting, you might even be screening the applications. So if you've already got the posting out and you've got the applications coming in, then you might go over the applications at this time. Now, at this time, usually the applications are confidential. And so you might talk about them by number. So let's say you get 4 or 5 applications if you're doing an internal. And so you might number them 1 through 5. And then, so as you talk about them with the board members, you're talking about number 1, this is what we like about number 1, this is what we like about number 2. And so obviously if it's an internal search, people might know exactly who you're talking about. But when I do this work, usually, I'm dealing with a bigger situation. And so we talk about them by numbers so that we're not disclosing their identity. So if they don't get an interview, then you've kept that confidential thing. Once they get an interview, then it becomes public. So once they accept the interview and you get the schedule, then you have to make that public, and then you invite people to the interviews, and then you've got a schedule of the interview process. Now, another thing you might want to consider is looking at the superintendent contract. So maybe you've done that already, maybe your attorney has, but you should look at it. If Rod was there for 10 years, there might be some things that you would want to adjust. And so sometimes it's helpful to have that work started so you're ready. When you're ready to make an offer, you're closer with what you want to propose for a contract. Does that make sense? Questions on this one? Nothing? So remember about the interview.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I tried to turn off my microphone. Can I jump in? I wondered about the interviews. What is your thoughts on asking everyone an identical list of questions that we developed that seems to have some pros, but the negatives of that is that people have different life experiences, and we want to explore, what strengths and weaknesses go with that. Do you have a thought as to how that usually proceeds?
Yeah, usually, yes. I do have a thought on that. Usually, you do ask the same question to the first round. And it's generally, the first round is usually considered a little bit of a screening kind of a round. So you're trying to kind of keep it apples to apples. And usually the questions are not so much focused on that person's background as much as they're focused on what are they going to do as the superintendent. So that's why they're usually, it's fine to do them similar or almost exact questions. I just finished a search a couple weeks ago. In the first round, we did the same exact questions for each candidate. And so the different answers and the different things were what the board was reviewing. Then when we went in the second round, we came up with different questions for each candidate based on what they answered and what they were bringing to the table. Like one person was more of a finance person, so she got a couple questions on curriculum. The other person was more of a curriculum person. She got a couple questions on finance. And so it was different in the second round because we were delving deeper. And so that's what I would say. Usually the first round, usually similar questions to each candidate. Second round, then it's delving deeper.
Okay,
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Rob, how many people were you dealing with in that interview process?
So usually in the first round, you're anywhere from 4 to 6. And in that particular district, I was doing 5. There were 5 that were interviewed. And I just finished up 2 searches here in June, and both of them first round was 5, and one of them second round was 3, and the other one second round was 2. And so yeah, it's usually, I mean, it can be all over the place, but usually in first round you're going to do at least 4, if there's that many, of course, and then second round obviously 2 at least, or 3. I would not take more than 3 into the second round. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that helps. Would you change the process if you only had 2 or 3 apply altogether?
Yeah, you might. I mean, you might just do one round. It's possible. But, you know, when I get into this, I've got a couple slides on first round, second round, and the differences. And you know, this one thing that you want to think about is having a very thorough process and having people perceive that you're doing, you know, your due diligence and stuff. And so it doesn't hurt to do a second round usually, and I do change it up for second round. I mean, usually like second round, I would have a presentation, for example. Have the candidates present on something, maybe a topic of their choosing or a topic of the board's choosing. You could also do in the second round, you could do a meet and greet. You know, like even if you're stuck on Zoom, you could do a Zoom meet and greet with the candidates, you know, and allow somebody to facilitate, or have the candidate themselves facilitate a meeting with people that want to jump in and see them. I mean, so there's different things you can do to get to it. But I will say one thing: if you already know who you're going to select, you probably should not go through a second round. So if the first round it is obvious who you're going to select and the board feels that way, then either just bring that one candidate back for another round, or you know, go ahead and do the thing, if that makes sense. I would not go through anything that you didn't need to, just for appearance's sake, for that matter. All right, let's see. How do I share here again? Where's my sharing? Here we go. And you guys feel free to jump in, you know, obviously. All right, you can still see this. Okay, so then one of the things about interviews is thinking about how do you want to ask the questions. And I do have some questions that I can share with you tonight if you wanted to look at some, or I could email them to Kelly. But some questions are more behavioral based. So it's kind of like, what have you done? Tell us about this. Tell us about that. It's trying to bring out experiences in various aspects of what you're looking for. And so you're looking for behavioral, like what have they done, as opposed to what they think they would do. And of course, remember that interviews are just one aspect of the process. Don't forget about your reference checking and checking on the track record of the candidates. So here's the first round. It's 4 to 6 candidates. You know, ask your behavioral based questions. Don't do a lot of follow-up questions in the first round. You know, you're trying to promote the equity of the process. You know, everyone gets an equal kind of a chance. Then in the second round, this is where you could do an informal reception. You could have a presentation. You can have follow-up questions more in depth. You can explore certain things. Like I've had boards actually get into like one certain topic that they heard in the first round, and they wanted to hear more about it in the second round. So 2 or 3 questions about, you know, what they did with their reading program or whatever it was. And so you're trying to explore a little bit and really get into it in the second round is what I would say. And again, you know, this is kind of a compilation of a full search, not just internal. So sometimes, like, you might have to adjust. If you really only have 2 candidates in the first place, you know, it would probably be different than doing first and second round. And so these are a couple of things that I usually talk about to a board about what are you looking for, what needs to happen in terms of the leadership context. Are you needing trust building? Are you needing to be more strategic in your planning? Are you trying to turn around the district, rebuild from declining enrollment, whatever, what's needed in that regard? And then you're kind of looking at what extent can this individual think, learn, solve problems? How on top of it can they be? And obviously I think some of the skills that superintendents have, responsiveness, organized, being able to think on their feet, all of those things are important. And then of course you're looking at past performance. How have they performed in the past, even if it wasn't, as a superintendent? Those are your predictors of success as you're going forward. So then when you get after the second round, now you're trying to get to a decision-making phase. And so even after the first round, you usually have to have some kind of discussion. And if you don't have a consultant or a facilitator, Kelly, you as the board president would be kind of facilitating this, and you would be asking, the board members to review their notes, review the feedback from the community, from the staff members, and then maybe they list their top 3, or maybe they list their top 2. Usually I would not at the end of the first round have people rank the candidates. I usually would talk to people about, who do you want to see again? Can we narrow this down? So if you had 5 and you're trying to narrow it to 2, you're trying to get down to people's top 2 as opposed to number 1 and number 2. So then at the end of the second round, it's the same type of thing. The other day when I was with the one district I'm thinking of, it was a little bit tricky at the end of the second round because we had 3 candidates and 3 board members had 1 as their number 1, 2 had the other one as their number 1, and the other 2 had the other one as their number 1. So I basically had 3 really good candidates. The one that ended up getting it was the one with the 3 votes, and the reason it was is because after 1 was eliminated, so the strategy that I used was going from 3 to 2. So one person only got 2 first place votes, and then the rest of the people all had that person third. And so basically the discussion was, can anybody of the 5 that had this person third, can any of you see this person being the superintendent? And basically after a lot of discussion, the answer was no. So that person was eliminated. So then once we were down to 2, then those 2 people that had voted for that one person switched their vote then, and they voted for the one that had the 3 votes. And so that made it 5 to 2. And so then that was the person ultimately that the board voted 7-0 to offer it to. So there's a technique in discussion of how do you get to the to the final one, and trying to do it in a effective and productive manner. So then once you coalesce around one candidate, then now you're going to offer the position. And so basically the motion is offer the superintendent's position contingent upon agreement on a contract. And so you need a majority vote from the board on that. Then you need to negotiate the contract. And so you might have an attorney involved, maybe the board president gets involved, or maybe there's a committee on the board that works on it. And then obviously you're trying to agree with the candidate. And so eventually then you get an agreement, and then you have to actually vote on the contract then. So it's always two separate motions to hire a superintendent. One is to offer the position contingent upon agreement on a contract. And then the second one is to actually vote on the contract and approve the contract, if that makes sense. And then, of course, at the end of this process, there needs to be a support phase. And so you should be thinking about doing a workshop with the new superintendent and talking about roles and relationships and goal setting and things like that. You should also be thinking about, what are the goals going to be for the year? You should be thinking about how are we going to evaluate this person? All of those things, those big picture things of the support phase that would be needed. And then I put in a couple slides on evaluation. You have to do an evaluation annually, and there is a facilitated evaluation process that you can do, through MASB that's helpful. But let me get off of this and answer your questions here. Let me stop sharing. And so, I mean, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So let's get into the nitty gritty. What do you want to know in regard to what you guys are working on? Speak to me. Tell me anything.
Does anybody want to go? I have a few questions, but I'll let everyone else go first. Rachel, you're unmuted.
Okay. I guess what I'm hoping to, I want it to be very objective in the way that we approach our choice. I would hope to avoid, a gut feeling or a general just wanting to go with people that we like and are comfortable with. Not that that's not important, but when you're evaluating a superintendent's answers or a candidate's answers, I should say, are you typically, is there some numerical system that you recommend following where we give a scale rating to each of our answers so we can be more objective in that way? Is that typically how it's done?
Rachel, that's good because that's exactly what I do. I use a 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's not too hard, but 3 is, I really like the answer. I think they nailed it. 2 is, it was okay. And 1 is, I didn't really like it. So then at the end of if you do 20 questions, you can add up your score and you can have a score of, 58 and then a 52 and then a 46. I mean, you can see numerically what your feelings were during the interview. Now it's hard to have questions that have look fors. I don't know if you've ever done the perceiver or any type of structured interviews that have look fors. That would take a lot more work to do that and come up with that. And you guys probably most boards can't really do that. The look fors are more of they're a little more of a gut feeling, but you could be thinking about the criteria. Remember I talked about developing that criteria. So you're looking for answers that will check off the box on those criterias. So let's say you ask a question about strategic planning. And so one of your criteria was you want a collaborative leader, listens to people, blah, blah, blah. So then in the answer, the candidate says, well, strategic planning, I just work with the board and I really make sure the board is on board, and I don't really deal with the staff and the community that much. I mean, if they answered that way, I'm not saying they ever would. But then you would say, oh, that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking more for that collaborative. But if you get an answer that says, I'm going to involve stakeholders, I'm going to have meetings, I'm going to have focus groups, and this is how I would do it, it might hit some of those things that were on that criteria. And that's why you would give a 3 instead of a 2, for example. So for what I would say is, yes, I think on your questions, you should have some type of a scale. I just use 3, 2, 1. And then to get to your 3, you're trying to look for the things that were in your criteria that you guys were talking about from the stakeholder input and from your input, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
So I did do this with this board a couple weeks ago, and I actually saw their scores. So I saw a couple of people at 58, 57, and then a 46, and so I did see that the board members had done that, and then they had added them up and they had an actual answer for themselves, so theoretically that answer should match their gut. You don't want to just go on your gut. You'd like to have some numerical evidence that says, yeah, this is why I like this person, because I've got the evidence right here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Heather, how about you? I see you in the middle of my screen here.
Hold on, mine's always so slow to unmute. Okay, so I don't really have any specific at this point. I guess with the when we go back to the survey with our stakeholder engagement, what besides our top qualities, what should we be really looking for to find out from our community as far as what they're looking for in their superintendent? What should we specifically be putting in that survey that is really going to help us
All
understand?
right, I'll give you 4 things. One is, I think you should ask people what previous background should they be coming from. So that type of, teacher, principal, that type of K-12 background, that type of question. Second thing is, what kinds of competencies are most important to you? So I would talk about things like, finance, curriculum, personnel, facilities, did I say curriculum? I mean, special ed. I mean, those are some of the competencies, and people might list. So like a special ed teachers might list special ed, and somebody that's interested in the whole financial thing might list finance. But you usually give people like, pick your top 3 or something, and so then you'll see how the trend goes. Then the third thing I would say would be like qualities. So their attributes. So this would be things like organized, honest, hardworking, things like that. And you can list a bunch of them and have people list their pick their top 5, or you could have them rank them all 1 to 5, that type of thing. And then the fourth thing I would ask, and this is more of a district thing, is like, do you want us, you might not want to do this one, but it's an interesting one. Do you want us to pick somebody similar to what we had before, or do you want us to pick somebody that's completely in a different direction, or do you want us to pick somebody that's, kind of in a different, that type of thing, where you're trying to get a sense of, did people like, what you've been doing the last few years? Are people ready for a pretty big change, or are they ready for just some slight changes? Okay. That's hard to frame that, but that's kind of an interesting one, and that's a little bit of an indictment on the whole system. It's not just about the superintendent sometimes when you think about it like that. But I have seen that particular question, be completely, like, complete different direction, or I've also seen it be pretty even keeled, like, well, obviously pick somebody that needs to make necessary changes, but we're not looking for a wholesale throw the baby out with the bathwater thing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
What else? Kelly, you said you had a few?
I do. So I guess regarding the public, well, let's go back to the questionnaire. Would it just be simply a numeric scale? Have you seen areas for just general comments and feedback? Have you asked them to develop interview questions or examples of questions that they might like to see us ask during the interview process, or is that just getting into too much detail?
Yeah, on the last one, I would say that's too much. And you'll have a chance to do that right in the interview if you want to. You can have people, submit a question, and of course, if you're live in person, they can submit it on a piece of paper, and you can review it and then ask it. And I've done that. But I don't think I would do that on the survey. I think on the survey, yeah, usually there's an open-ended question that you might want to put in there that people would comment on. And so I would do a combo of, maybe 1 or 2 open-ended questions, and then the other one's more of a, you know, a ranking or numerical, so that you can put some, you know, some numbers to what types of qualities they want.
Okay, but there would be participation actually during the interviews if it was fitting, if we had somebody interested.
Yeah, absolutely, you could do that. And of course, you know, this is in a public meeting, so you do have to do public comment, and usually you do public comment at the beginning of the meeting, Kelly. So you'll call to order, and then your agenda is the interviews, and before we do the interviews, let's see if there's any public comment. Usually there isn't any there, and then you do the interviews, and then at the end of each interview, you could say, is there any questions from the audience? But what you need to do, though, you can't just let people ask questions, because they might ask something that's not appropriate. So you have to have them write it down. So if you're doing Zoom, you'd have to have a process where they could submit the question to the technology department or whatever, and they would give it to you somehow. Or, you know, I did that on one of mine here recently. We were live, the board was live, in person, and I was with the board and the candidate was with the board, but then everybody else was streaming or Zooming or whatever they were. And so we had a system set up where they could email this email address, and then the secretary brought it into us. And so I did get some questions from a couple people that were watching. So I reviewed the questions, and then I gave it to the board to ask.
Okay.
So it could be done. It's easier if it's in person.
Okay.
Everything.
Any other questions going with ladies first? Megan, did you have any questions?
No, I actually, because I missed the first about 15 minutes of the meeting. Sorry about that. I was wondering if I could get the slides sent to me from the first 15 minutes, but I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I can send it. I'll send them to Kelly, and she can distribute them. I mean, all it was really, the first 15 minutes was more of a summary of just like what's going on in Michigan.
Okay.
And so you didn't miss too much. I mean, I
Okay.
thought it was brilliant, but of course, you know, no one else did. So, but yeah, other questions?
Mike, David?
I do have a question, maybe more so of how we got here in the process. I was part of workshops and things before, and special meetings where we could make decisions and vote on decisions. It sounds like there's been decisions made, people talked to, and as a board, I don't think we've agreed on what route to go. I think we have to be careful that we don't do that without having a board meeting and have a special meeting so we can take action on what our framework is going forward.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. I know that I was just contacted. Well, actually, I know how I got here is I heard that you guys are making a change, and so I told MASB, and then MASB reached out to the board president that, hey, we could do this workshop, and
No, I
then
think
that's how
workshops
that
are always
happened.
good, and I think the more information for everybody, the better. But we cannot decide information and decide what we're going to do without the whole board voting on the process. We've had, 10 years ago, we've had workshops, we've had special meetings to the board to decide on how we want to go, how we want to do it. We at one point we're going to do committee surveys. Other times we decide to stay internal, and everybody's happy either way. So I just think we have to be careful that we're not having a person or two decide the direction of this process, and we have to, as a board out in public, make sure we all vote on how we're going to do this.
Was there something decided on before I got to the meeting? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Well, I thought maybe I heard it wrong. I thought I heard correctly that we were going to do these surveys. We were going to have the stakeholders. We were going to have this, which I'm not saying it's a problem, but I think as a board, we have to vote on that and see exactly how we're going to do this and put it down and have an official record of what we're going to do. I mean, if there's people that have been talked to and superintendents and other people, I think the board should at least know who has been talked to and kept up to date on the community and the community surveys and what we're going to do. I think or maybe it's just me, I'm in the dark. I was out of town for a couple days, but I think a lot of that should be done at the table.
Well, and I think that's kind of why we're here today, is to get the ball rolling. And so I want somebody who's kind of an expert in the field. We haven't hired anybody. I mean, I did tell Rod that we're not necessarily interested in hiring anybody to do the search, but to just get an idea of what's been done in other places. Out of the 7 board members, 6 of us have never been through this process before. So that's how we ended up here tonight, is to get some
Well,
topics.
I think it's a great idea to have Rob
forward.
here and let us know how that goes.
The position's been posted, so I think in all fairness, we need to develop our process so we can start moving things along.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I'm kind of suggesting the types of things, like if I had to give you the biggest things to think about, I've kind of put that in the PowerPoint. Like, number 1, you got to post it, think about the salary, think about your dates, what dates do you want to do? So you guys could decide that kind of stuff tonight, or you could have another meeting to decide it. I mean, in terms of doing a survey of the community, I don't know that you need all 7 board members to decide on what the survey is, but somebody has to, do it. So like, you could delegate it, you could talk about the big picture of it, and then the details of it have to be done by somebody to get it out there. I mean, obviously, if you're going to do a survey, it's got to be like a Survey Monkey or some process. And that usually takes like a secretary of the board, maybe like the executive secretary, or maybe somebody like one of these tech guys that's listening in here. They could help with that, but somehow the board has to give the direction, and then that work has to happen, So the idea of doing a survey is kind of what I'm talking about. Actually, what goes into it is a little bit more detailed. And then after the survey is the process of starting to, like I talked about, the interview questions. Now, I can send you some interview questions. I could go over those with you tonight, or I can do whatever you want. I have a lot of things that I could offer you that you could just use. You don't have to hire me or hire MASB to help you with this. I mean, I can help you kind of behind the scenes, but you're kind of on your own when you're doing this as a board, and you don't have somebody helping you. You have to kind of get somebody to help you, like maybe your executive assistant, or maybe the board president has to take the lead, or somebody has to kind of take the lead to do the actual little pieces of it, if that makes sense. What else? Am I helping or hurting?
I think you're helping. David, do you have anything to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can get it so you can see me.
Hey, there
Can
you
you
are.
see me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi. So just to Mike's point, I kind of get what he's saying, and I think part of that is we had a meeting, and I guess the only statement made tonight that kind of caught me off guard was this fractured board. I don't think that's a true representation. We vote on issues all the time. Normally, we're unanimous. We weren't on the last major vote, which was for an interim superintendent. But I would expect that as we go through this process, that this board's professionalism would shine, and I don't think that we're fractured. I think that's an injury to our reputation. I don't think it was necessary. Secondly, I do think we had a committee that was supposed to do the selection process, like define the questions, define the meetings, what we were going to do. And so, to Mike's point, I kind of agree that it feels like what you're presenting makes total sense to me, Rod, by the way. I always seem to like MASB presentations. They seem to fit the mode of what we need to do as board members. And I thank you for coming. But with that, I do think that we need to have the process defined if it's not, because I kind of thought that was what the selection committee was doing, was defining our next steps. So if it's tonight that we're doing that, that would be great to be able to participate as a whole board. But I don't think we can take action tonight, so I don't know how we can initiate board direction when we're at a workshop. So, and again, I think that's what Mike is saying, is that we can't take action, we can't vote on a direction. So how do we do that? What do we do tonight that can facilitate with the posting already out there, anticipating a closing of the posting? I think that was, if I'm not correct, somebody correct me, but I think it was July 13th, so it's not too far away. So what is the goal then of our workshop tonight, and what has the selection committee done thus far?
The selection committee was supposed to give you the 3 candidates the other day that we thought were going to be put forward for discussion. That was completely kiboshed, and therefore we're here at this meeting to try to kind of get back on track, I feel like. So moving forward, I feel like so I don't think that that committee, I think that committee has a different function at this point, because originally I thought that was just to select possibly the interim. So I'm not sure if we have the same committee for the next part moving forward.
Well, I think there was confusion then on what that committee's role was. My understanding was that committee's role was to lay out the process for the board, assist the board in setting the direction for the posting, and prepare us. So again, the superintendent resigned the night that we also had to make a decision on an interim superintendent. So I don't know what the committee had discussed regarding selecting an interim, but I don't remember that being part of the committee's responsibility, at least not what was told to me. And I didn't put the kibosh on anything by making a motion. We did secure 4 votes for that motion, and it's unfortunate that there weren't more. I didn't appoint a superintendent. I appointed an interim, or I made a motion to, and I think that was perfectly fitting for our board to make a decision and be decisive. So, moving forward in this process, I think that we just need to be more transparent on, what the agenda here is. And if we're going to do a survey, then I think the board needs to know up front we're doing that. I think community input is better to come through the front end than to have it in the back end on social media, which, certainly can happen. So I support the idea of doing a survey, but I just like to know that we have a process defined, and if there's a committee that's doing that work, then I would like them to do it, bring it back to the board with a recommendation. That's all I got on that.
I just want to jump in here. I wondered, I think we have a meeting, if I'm not mistaken, scheduled for next Wednesday, a week from now. And maybe you can speak to what the purpose of that meeting was. I'm not clear. Was that to kind of go over the applications that we received, and then schedule our procedure for interviewing those candidates, or because that could be a time that we vote on a survey. We could, maybe the subcommittee could meet and develop survey questions, and if it's approved, we could put it out after a vote at that meeting to approve it. I think what I'm hearing from everyone is that it would be better than not to have community input into this process.
Well, maybe we can talk about that. So the meeting that was scheduled for the 15th would be to review the applications, because the application close was on the 13th, to see, who had applied, to go through those and then decide on the next steps. We did schedule some further meetings just to have some dates put in, but we're not, I don't think this is a process we want to rush. I think we want to take our time and do it the right way. So we are in no way committed to any of those meeting dates, but as you know, Robin was going out on vacation, so I just wanted to get a few things that I knew we could have in place with the Open Meetings Act and having it set up remotely and that type of thing before she left. And maybe with Rod here, we can ask the question regarding an open meeting. Do we have to take a vote and have a motion to send out a survey to the public? Is that something we can just discuss right now by poll of the board? do we have to have a formal motion to appoint a committee to conduct that process in terms of coming up with the interview questions and the evaluation tool and those steps? Or is that something that can just be done through discussion, through an informal committee tonight?
Yeah, all of it can be done informally. I do think it's good to have the whole board involved. Now I know we're missing one tonight, but yeah, I would generally not do a committee other than possibly to work on some details. The big stuff I would do as a full board, and so like the questions usually, you know, I mean, usually, like, I don't know if you want me to send you the questions that I would use, but yeah, the questions are kind of, I would just say it's hard to get 7 people to come up with questions. It's a little bit like herding cats. So you need some process for that. So if you're going to do a committee, that might be where you delegate, like, okay, here's the types of questions we want. Can you 3 board members, put this into a format and then have it ready for the full board? And then obviously there needs to be trust by the full board. It's hard to do the questions in a big board meeting because then you're making them public, because all the stuff we do is public. So a lot of times what I do is I give board members the questions, and then they look at them, and then they just suggest changes or slight modifications or a question or two. And so the whole list of 20 questions is not out there, for discussion before we actually interview people. So yeah, I mean, you can do, everything can be done informally with the group. Are you saying you have, you can't take motions tonight because it's a workshop and it's not a regular meeting? Is that kind of what you're going to, Kelly?
I think I just wanted to do an informal poll of the board to see if they would be interested in some type of a survey. I would hate to wait a whole week for another meeting to decide that we then wanted to do that, because I know it's going to take some time to put all that together. We'd lose the work of a week of production time.
Yeah, you could absolutely ask the board members tonight if they think a survey would be good, and then we could talk about a process for developing the survey, and how you would, because one thing you could do is send the survey to the board members and just say, hey, this is what it is. Unless you've got major objections, this is what we're going to send out. I mean, the survey is pretty generic, innocuous. It's not going to be problematic. It's just trying to get a feel for the community's feelings about certain qualities. That's really what you're doing.
Okay. So on there, let me just ask everybody, who would be in favor of starting to put together, of selecting a committee to put together some survey questions? So Heather?
Yeah, I would be in favor of that, and I'd be happy to help out with that if we need someone willing to do it.
Wonderful, thank you. Megan?
I'd be in favor of it too. I may want to take a step back from a committee just for a moment. I don't know if we needed to do a committee. I don't necessarily know if I want to be a part of that right now, just because I'm trying to finish my master's.
Understandable, thank you. Rachel?
Yes, I think that would be a great idea to do a survey, and it sounds like we may not even need a committee to get the questions and put them forward. So I will do what I need to do to help, but it sounds like it might not be necessary anyway.
Thank you. Mike?
I'm not necessarily opposed. I do think that if we do have a survey, once from MASD are already created, would probably be beneficial to keep us even out of those questions altogether, to show it's not leading anyway. But I will say that people that it's in the community that are claiming wanting community input are the same ones last time that were happy we didn't have it. So I'm not going to fight the board on it. If that's the way we want to go, I would support the survey.
David?
Yeah, like I said, I don't have an issue with, doing a survey. I just, want to make sure that we're moving in the direction that we all, agree to. So this is a good thing.
Okay.
Well, Kelly, what I would suggest that you do is get somebody to develop the survey and then send it to the board members and make sure they know it's going out before it goes out. So nobody's caught off guard. I mean, that's the main thing is you don't want to catch the board off guard if they didn't think that a survey was being done. But I would keep it short and simple and, something that people can fill out in 10 minutes. And, and then let the board members know first. And then if everybody's kind of like, hey, that's fine, then you just boom, send it out, and you get that in.
Rob, do you have any sample templates that maybe you could share with Kelly that she could share with the board? Not a specific one generated for us, but something that we could at least look at and work off of?
Yeah, let me see what I can come up with. I think I could send you something, Kelly, that would give you some help on that. And then you'd have to put it together yourself. I can't ask MASB to do it, but I think I've got one that I could send you that would be helpful to you. In the same way with questions, I actually prepared some questions for you already because I knew you guys would be going down that road. And, you can use them. Absolutely. You can change them up. I've got one in there about COVID, and I've got, some of these questions, you guys probably know the work is really similar. It's like finance, it's personnel, it's curriculum, it's get along with people, it's supervision. There's general things that people are expecting to have to do when they become a superintendent, and that's the questions that you ask. And I could even send you, Kelly, a search criteria thing that I developed that you could kind of tweak, and once you get your results, then you can tweak it into that type of format so you can kind of share it. It's a one-page thing that people can look at and say, okay, yeah, these are the qualities that we're looking for. This makes sense. And that's what you're looking for with your board. And I will say that this process is helpful to the board to working together and figuring out, you do the work and you kind of can get coalesce around, this is what we really want to do. And then you do the interviews, then you can fight, over whatever. But when you develop your process, that's when you can kind of be together on things.
Thank you. I think whatever tools you are willing to share with us, from the interview questions to the survey, and possibly an evaluation tool, that's been used based on the results of the questions during the interview process. How long, if you send out a survey, how long do you give people to respond generally?
I would say a week.
Okay.
You don't want to go too long because people get it, they do it. People get it, they do it. So, I wouldn't go much longer than a week.
Okay, thank you.
And I like it too, where you get the results online. I know they do some type of Survey Monkey. People do this kind of stuff. I don't necessarily do it, but other people do.
Okay. I know we've used that tool for other things, so I think that will be helpful. Does anybody have any other comments on that process or on the purpose of the meeting for Wednesday, July 15th?
And that's to review the applications. Just a question, do we need a meeting to review those applications?
Yes.
Publicly, or is it just to set the interviews? Okay, I wasn't sure if it was just the
No,
interviews or the
you
application.
should review the applications together as a group and then decide on who you want to interview. But in that same meeting, you could also be reviewing the stakeholder input and looking. So if you get this survey out a week from now, you could be looking at the results of it, right? And so you could do both of those things in that meeting, and that would give you a good sense of, okay, now these interview questions, that's the other thing you would do in that meeting, is you would look at the interview questions you don't have to talk about them a lot because obviously you're going to be in public, but you could review them and say, okay, that sounds good, and yeah, let's change this word on this one, or let's do this, and you can kind of work as a group on the questions and have them ready if you've got a rough draft to start with, which I'll send you. So
Kelly,
those
do you
three
think that's
things,
enough
you can do
time
those three things.
for that meeting?
Mike,
Or
I
take a
don't,
couple days later? I don't
I
either.
don't think it's enough time. I think, we probably will end up canceling that meeting, and we have a meeting then scheduled on Monday, the 20th. That might be a better target. I
Yeah,
think
I was gonna say another week might give us time to get that survey back and forth instead of just wasting
I
the
agree.
meeting for one item.
I agree. I think we'll all want to look at the questions. Well, first of all, we'll have to get the document. We'll have to look at the questions, agree to the questions, create the tool, accumulate the results, give people enough time to respond. And I don't, just because I set those dates doesn't mean we're committed to those. I had Robin available, so we put a few together. But I think a more realistic goal would be Monday the 20th to review the results of the survey. I think we would then use that as a guide to develop the interview questions and select the candidates. And at that point, we could schedule interviews.
Yeah, that does sound good. And I will say, you know, if the applications aren't due until the 13th, it's certainly fine to review them on the 20th. And the other thing you could do, Kelly, is, and I don't know if you'll have access to this, but the way I do it is I have an online portal, and then I send the board members a link, and so then they can see the applications and review them for a few days before the meeting on the 20th. So
Okay.
that might be helpful to give the board members. And so as long as you keep them confidential, board members, that's fine. So however you're collecting the applications, you could send them out to the board members on the 14th or 15th. Then they've got 3 or 4 days to review. You could also send them the questions. And then you could also, if you got the results from the survey, you could send them the results for the survey. So then when they come in on the 20th, you've got these things, they've seen these things, and then you can talk about them. Now you do not need a formal motion on all of this stuff. Like, for example, the questions that you're going to ask. You just need to do consensus with each other and say, okay, this sounds good. Yep. Mike, you take this one. Dave, you take that one. Heather, and you kind of just organize yourselves. And then if somebody needs to change a word or something, you talk about it and you all just agree. But when you come to the interviews, like who you're going to interview, you may want to do a motion for that. So you probably don't need to do a motion for this other stuff that you're doing by consensus, but you might want to have a motion that, I move that we interview these 2 people or these 3 people or whatever. But before you make that motion, you are deciding as by consensus, you're talking about it and you're kind of, on the same page before someone finally makes a motion that you've all kind of talked about. And then of course, when you're done with this whole thing, when you get to the point where you're making an offer, you definitely want a motion there. And again, you've talked about it first, so everybody knows what that motion is going to be before you do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So I'll send Kelly all my stuff. So she'll have just like the major stuff. And then you guys can use it how you want to and just kind of roll. And then if you have questions, Kelly, just, you got my email, you can just ask me.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Rob while we have him with us tonight? Heather?
I do. Hi. Okay, so when back to the motion for interviews, we had spoke earlier about identifying people by numbers rather than stating their names. Would we want to do that by number as well, or would we be revealing names by that point?
No, you would do it. You do it by number.
Mhm.
And in fact, that's probably why I don't do a motion at that point. Usually I just do it by consensus. But in your case, you might want to, in the board minutes later, you would add the names. But in the motion, you would be candidate number 1, candidate number 2, and candidate number 3. Because the reason is because until they accept the interview, it's really doesn't have to be public. So you want to give them a chance. Then you make a call. Somebody makes calls to invite them to the interview and sets up the schedule, and then they accept. Then that's when you make it public.
Thank you.
So as the applications come in, they should be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, so on.
Yeah, they.
And be identified as that until they.
Yes, and you'll be able to see their names. You would see the name, and then you'd also see the number. But the only people that would see the names are the board members, and then maybe if you have an assistant that's helping you, and then that's all confidential. You're keeping the applications confidential at that point in the process. And so when you start talking about them publicly, then you use the number to talk about them, you know. And honestly, if they're all internal and everybody knows everybody, it might be a little, you know, they might be able to tell who you're talking about, but I still think it's part of the process to try to keep it confidential as you're talking about the candidates until they've accepted an interview.
And I just wanted to say something to the board. I know I just said I could help with whatever survey questions come in. I'm out of town until this Saturday, and I'm in the Upper Peninsula. I'm actually borrowing a friend's house right now so that I can do this. I don't really have the internet, so it sounds like maybe we're going to get basically the questions that we need to submit anyway. But I know I offered to help. I guess I'm going to have to withdraw that if it's going to have to go out within the next 3 days or so.
Do we have anyone else who'd be willing to help Heather with the process?
Heather volunteered.
Okay, Heather, I'm in. I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
Megan.
Once everybody approves it, I think I worked with Stephanie before on and have, I think, still the password to do the Survey Monkey if we needed that. So it'll be easier that way as well.
Can we nominate Sean since he's not here?
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, I kind of pushed for Megan because I know you've worked with the Survey Monkey before and did a good job for us. So I was kind of leading that question in your direction. So thank you for jumping in to help.
Well, I'll send this stuff all to Kelly so she'll have it, so then you can email it to who you need to, and then you guys call me if you need me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help and your time this evening.
All right. Hey, good to see everybody. Nice to meet you.
Hey, thank you very much.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Rod.
Thank
Bye
you,
now.
guys.
Thank you. Okay, any other discussion with the board before we have a motion to adjourn?
No, Kelly, in the meantime, I know you mentioned the questions 10 years old, and some of them probably are not relevant. Some of them still are. I'll send those out to the board as well, just so we have a general idea of what was asked before, in case we want to modify or keep any along with the questions before. And other than that, I think we should be good. My only thought is when we get to this process, and I know when we had that committee, I thought we were going to do the process. I don't think it worked quite like any of us thought. None of us thought it was going to work that way the last time. I just hope when we go forward, we get a chance to hear from everybody before we make any decisions, any motions, and we all get on the same page and do this. Years ago, the board had some issues, and we had some split votes, and we all came together and did a 7-0 vote for Rod when he was the superintendent back then. And I don't see any issue that we can't do that together again. So going forward, I think we'll be fine, and I'll send those questions out to you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think we need a motion to adjourn. Don't make me make it myself.
I'll make that motion.
I'll make the motion then, or whoever did. Megan made it. I'll support it.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Drake, support by Mr. Hawkins. Mr. French, will you take roll?
I will. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mrs. Drake.
Yes.
Mr. French is a yay. Mr. Gerhardt is absent. Mr. Hawkins.
Yes.
Mrs. Helton.
Yes.
Mrs. Howie.
Yes.
And Mrs. Lear.
Yes.
Motion carried. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. 7:52 p.m. Good night, everybody.
night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.